How's it? I'm Zaw, your MC for Meet the Operators. Today we're going to be talking with my old friend Todd Sacerdoti. Todd is one of the scrappiest and smartest entrepreneurs in the biz. He and I started out as desk mates and daily ping pong opponents back at Spoke in 2003, which was the early days of social, before social media was even a term. He's now best known as the founder and CEO of BrightRoll, which he just sold to Yahoo for $640 million. BrightRoll was one of the first video ad networks, but I'm going to let Todd tell you more. All right, we're here with Todd. Thank you for joining Meet the Operators.
Nice to meet you.
Are you sure it's recording? I'm sure it's recording.
Okay.
I've done this before.
Is this ever going to be played, or is it just...
Yes. No, it's actually, there is a sound version. I think 9 out of 10 people will never play it.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can look at the transcript. Okay, so we've obviously known each other a very, very long time. We kind of grew up together in the trenches of the social media wars. What was that, 2003?
2003, yeah.
2003, and you've come a long way. I'm still trying to come as far as you have. What we wanted to talk about today is a little bit around, obviously, how you grew BrightRoll, right? Because that's your claim to fame. But most people don't know that you've done a ton of other stuff as well, including at one point owning what was probably the largest party promotion and event company in the city.
This is true?
It's true. But before we do that, we're going to go way, way back. And we're just going to try and give people a little bit of an understanding of who Todd is, the person.
Yeah.
Not just the man, the myth, and the legend.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start when you were a kid. What was your favorite superhero growing up?
I don't think I wasn't really into superheroes, but I was sort of in every successful athlete was a superhero to me.
Okay.
So, Don Mattingly was probably my favorite baseball player. Michael Jordan was my favorite basketball player. And to me, they were the superheroes of my childhood.
Yeah, well, I think they were icons for all of us.
Yeah.
Okay. What was your, do you have a favorite childhood memory? Imagine back.
Favorite childhood memory. God, that's a tough question. I wouldn't say anything sort of jumps to mind as like one memory. I would say that the thread through my childhood that was probably most impactful on me was I was a insane collector of baseball cards. And so there were many moments from being very young getting a holiday gift of like, what was probably $20 at the time, but seemed like, the best gift ever was, like the latest baseball card pack or set or something like that. And then later, I actually was selling baseball cards at conventions, and it was an opportunity for me to be kind of like independent and leave the home and like do something on my own. And then like sort of later just just sort of being really passionate about baseball cards. So
what is the most that you ever made on a baseball card? Do you remember?
I really don't know. I still have them all. I sold a lot of cards, but I bought a lot of cards. So I don't know, probably hundreds of dollars, something like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I don't know. It's definitely not my favorite childhood memory, but when I think of my youth, the most sort of exciting things were sports-related things or baseball card-related things.
Now, I had a couple of cards that I was like the proudest of. I remember I had a David Robinson, which is basketball, but rookie card, and I had a Mark McGwire rookie card.
Yeah, McGwire and Ken Griffey Jr. I think were the two big.
Yeah, I never got that one.
Yeah.
Was there
I also got
I
got my dad's collection, so he had his were totally destroyed from a quality standpoint because he actually put them in the bike wheel, but. I would say some of my favorite cards were just my dad's cards. I didn't have like a Maris or Mantle, but I had a few other like kind of 50s athletes, which was kind of fun. But Ken Griffey Jr. was like, when I was a kid, the rookie that really changed collecting. Yeah,
absolutely. It was worth a lot. Okay, so let's step back to kind of later in your career. As you've gotten older and you've started to, you read obviously a ton and you are a student of history, is there anyone in history that you would most like to meet?
Mostly anyone in history that you would.
It could be. Let's go with a real historical person, not fictional.
Well, I mean, I think the people that I'm most drawn to are like the inventor types, like the Edisons, the Teslas, the people that were like tinkerers and inventors. I think those are people that I find most fascinating in history. I don't think they'd be anywhere near as interesting to me as they appear in books. I think those types of people, I don't know if there's one specific, but I would say anybody who was sort of a prolific inventor, Ben Franklin, over their life, I think would have been fascinating. Sure. Yeah, any of those guys.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's segue into into running businesses and the true operator. So, tell us before the acquisition by Yahoo, how big was BrightRoll? How many people were you managing or hired up to?
Yeah, we were slightly over 400 people when we were acquired. We were kind of hundreds of millions of revenue. We had been profitable for 4 years. We had about 13 offices, 2 outside the U.S. Those are the kind of high-level metrics.
And we talked a little bit before this, and you had said, you felt like BrightRoll, really was an execution play as opposed to, having some other kind of wind in your sails. Why do you feel that way?
There's sort of an epic meeting in the history of BrightRoll where myself and the head of product engineering were sort of like, I think this was like 3 years before the acquisition, and just saying, okay, is this going to be like an iPhone category where there's someone's going to invent something that just changes the trajectory of their success and everyone else be left behind, or is this going to be like a execution business where there's a large surface area that you have to continually add value to, but you're never going to kind of 10x the category and sort of invent something that just changes everything. And I think that I think it's really important to know which type of category you're in. Of course, a lot of times the people think they're not in an iPhone category and then get innovated around. So it's actually pretty hard to know for sure. But my assessment was this was going to be like a blood sport category where it was a huge amount of surface area competing every day on relatively narrow kind of feature war and customer by customer battles. And as such, execution was going to be, really our defining characteristic. Of course, you have to innovate as well, but I just didn't think there was going to be this singular, innovation that changed everything. And so that sort of essentially changed how we went to market. It changed how we hired. It changed how we invested. But I think it was true for us in retrospect.
How did you communicate that to the team? Because obviously execution is important in any business, but that being kind of the primary focus, how is that relayed to the rest of the organization?
Well, I think everything starts with the strategy of the company, and our strategy wasn't, we're going to put every single resource on innovating in this one area. It's like, here are the, what we ultimately defined as kind of 3 strategic areas we were focused, and we're going to make significant investments in each, and as a result, we're going to be spread really thin, and the downside of that is, we may never have, the clearest number one in any one category, but as a result, we think that'll let us win over time. And I think you have to convince folks that strategy makes sense. And, there's a lot of it's all trade-offs, but I think that getting people behind that vision was what ultimately led us to being able to be successful.
Did you end up having to swap out any of the members of the team?
Not initially. Eventually I did bring in a COO who kind of reorganized the company. And by going after a large surface area and having multiple kind of business lines, ultimately we decided we needed single owners of each business, and the people we had in place, had sort of signed on for being kind of GMs of everything. And I think that's a logical point at which companies mature. But we didn't do a ton of swapping early on as a result of that decision.
Okay. And you said, so let's talk a bit about hiring, because you said obviously that execution play related into hiring. Did it change the type of people that you hired, or were you looking for specific things in your hires? How did you go about hiring with that in mind?
Well, I think it depends. We could talk about engineering hiring, or we could talk about hiring in general.
Okay.
But I would say that in hiring in general, it didn't necessarily change what we were hiring, only in the sense that we weren't looking for people who were going to come in and, we would give them a project and they would work entirely on their own and kind of invent something new, right? That we wanted people that were going to be very knowledgeable of the category we're in, understood the competitive landscape, understood how to incrementally differentiate our platform versus other platforms, and sort of, every week or every, development cycle figure out how to add value to our platform. And that's a very different and it's somewhat less attractive to certain people. Want to be like given a project, like go, conquer a new market and think about it completely a new way, and you don't need to worry about what anyone else is doing because you're essentially inventing the future, and that's exciting. I mean, I personally, individually, I love doing that, but that was not the business that we were in. So in that sense, it would impact who we hired. I think on a product and engineering standpoint, we also didn't have like, multi-quarter, sort of, invention processes. So it wasn't like go into a new market, pick a new technology, completely think about this, in a new way and come back with a new innovative solution. A lot of it was incremental feature development. And that's, again, it's just a different skill set and a different area of interest.
As you guys were thinking about your hiring plan for that, is there, I don't know, specific questions or ways that you would tease out whether that person was suited for what you guys were looking for?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time like nailing down the sort of the definition of what made somebody a BrightRoll person, from like a cultural perspective. And two of the elements of that were really collaboration, so someone who really does like to work with other people in the company, and people who we call it GSD, which was get shit done, people that are like very execution focused. And so during the interview process, we would, in addition to other things, passion and transparency were really the other two, we would try to tease these things out. But if someone wasn't like what we would call like a GSD person by nature, that just wasn't a good fit for us. It doesn't mean they're not a good fit for business, just not for our company. And I would say that, it became very clear when somebody joined the company, did they fit into the GSD culture or not? And it was a very clear filter for us up front, and it was a terminatable, I guess that's not the right word, offense if you were not that way once you were here. Right? If you did not focus on execution, we just weren't interested.
So a lot of companies, especially as they're growing, are trying to do what I think you've done and kind of build out these set of core values that especially that they look for on the hiring side.
Yeah.
How did maybe you don't remember, but building out these four: passion, transparency, collaboration, and getting shit done.
Yeah.
What was the process to build that out? Because that's not the easiest thing to kind of translate into only four characteristics.
How did we create the four?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I always think culture your culture is sort of, when you think of your values, is like a reflection of reality rather than like an aspirational goal. So I think when we actually decided to narrow down our values to those four things based on, when we ramped up our hiring process, we were starting to hire inconsistently. So it wasn't like the other way around where at the beginning of the company we said these are the four things that matter. It was more, we started ramping up hiring. We said we need to have a clear filter in the hiring process. So let's discuss, what is the reflection of our culture in terms of values. So it was a little bit of a sort of a backwards process from how you would traditionally think about it. And it was driven by our head of talent who said, I need the values clearly defined because I want the hiring process to reflect that. I want the questions we ask in the process to filter for that. And I want to make sure that we're authentic about those things in terms of how we reward and, potentially terminate employees. Like, to me, the best measure of culture is, do you terminate someone who doesn't comply with it? Like, if you don't, then it's not really your culture. And like one of the examples that I think that I recommend to other companies is like, make sure that your hiring process, like the actual process itself, like purely to its core reflects the values of the company. So like if you value getting shit done, then candidates shouldn't be like waiting for a response for 2 weeks, like in the middle of the process, right? Like if you value getting shit done in execution, like that person should say, wow, like I sent an email in, I got a response in 24 hours. I went into an interview, I got feedback in 24 hours. If transparency is a value, I should know exactly where I am in that process, like what gates I need to get through to get the job. I also would expect to have very clear feedback after every interview session or gate in the process in terms of how I did and sort of where I stand. And, we got a lot of responses from people that interviewed at BrightRoll that it was actually the process itself that convinced them to join the company. They might have heard about us because of a TechCrunch article or they saw us on LinkedIn, but it was actually the interview process that convinced them that it was a company they wanted to join. And to me, that was like the sign that our process was working because, we did lots of things during the process to demonstrate our culture to people. And if they sort of were drawn to it, then they were probably a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
Like little things, like one of my favorite things that our head of talent did was there was a single talent person assigned to your interview process, right? So you had like a single person who was like shepherding you through the process. And when you would show up for your interview, the person was waiting in the lobby in a chair to greet you. And you'd walk, actually they wouldn't even be in a chair, usually they'd be standing there waiting, and you'd walk in and be like, "Hi Bob, it's so great to see you, we're really excited to have you come interview." And people would be like, "Holy shit," like I'm used to like going to the front desk, asking for the context, sitting there for 15 minutes, like, that awkward interview, like, you're in the lobby and you're like looking around, you don't know anyone. It's just like, there's just so many things about the process that are awkward.
Yeah.
This person would like greet you right up front. They'd be waiting for you. They'd walk you around. They'd introduce you to a few people. You felt super welcome. And at the end of the process, they would greet you at the end of the last interview. They would walk you out. They would say, "Listen, I'm going to talk to the team. I'm going to call you in like 3 hours, and I'm going to give you the exact feedback from your interview process." And they would go. We would do like a retro on the candidate, and they would call up and say, "Here's the feedback." It would be like, "Here are the things you did really well. Here are concern areas. Like there's concern that, maybe you're not as technical as we thought, or maybe, and then we'd literally give them the positive and negative. And people would be like, "Holy crap, like if this is what it's like to work here, that's the kind of place I want to work," right? And it's just it's just a very different process from any interview process, I ever went.
I don't think I've ever heard of an interview process like that, which is sad. It should be more like that. And did you use software to collect this stuff? Did you build a system internally? Because I don't know if I've ever heard of a system that people use for hiring being able to handle this or support it.
We ended up using a software package called Greenhouse, which I think is now sort of caught on as, it's pretty popular in the Valley. But before it, we honestly did everything like in Google Docs, and it was managed manually. And, it just, once we got to a certain scale, it became hard for the talent team to push that out. But the talent team originally was built only around product and engineering hiring, and we just weren't processing that many candidates. I think we hired, in the 2.5 years that team existed, we probably hired 50 to 75 people. So it wasn't like an unbearable process. Once they started owning everything, then we needed really software to do it. But one anecdote that I always share is our head of talent said, every single person we touch in the hiring process, from an email out or a LinkedIn ad or someone who comes in to one of our, we did a lot of kind of on property events, to somebody who comes in interviews who gets turned down. Like every touch is like a branding event for our hiring process. And if you actually map it out, the single largest segment of people you touch will be people you never interview.
Sure. And
the second largest segment will be people you interview and turn down. Right? Like the people that actually like you interview and you give them an offer and they accept will be like the smallest segment of people that you touch. And so you really need to think about like the broader touch points in terms of having a positive impact as much as the people who you actually hire. And the segment that we focused the most on was people we interviewed but didn't hire. Because like our hiring ratio, offer ratio is probably like less than 10%.
Okay.
Right? And I think it depends if you, like how many people, what gate in the process, how high the percentage got. But so one of the really big criteria was if we interview somebody and we decide they're not a fit, right? It's a very large segment of people we touch that will be very vocal about your company. And it was really important to him, and he convinced us all it was really important to the company, that those people had a great experience. And in the end, when we mapped referrals, we actually had more referrals from people we turned down than from any other segment other than employees.
Wow. Right?
So like if somebody goes through your interview process, you turn them down, and then they refer you a candidate, to me, that's like a great sign that A, the process is working, your culture is coming through, but B, it's a very low-cost referral channel, right? Just like existing employees are. And I think we hired, out of the 50 or so, we probably hired 5 to 7 folks through referrals of candidates we turned down, which was just, it's like a free channel. And I think there's no reason in people you turn down having a great experience. It doesn't cost you anything, right? And again, if that's part of your culture, that reflects in the interview process.
So if you're going to do it all over again, a couple years down the line, either your next company or another company that you help start, what would you change from day one, or what would you put in place from day one? Because obviously it's different when you're 5-10 person startup when you're a 500 person company.
I would say first and foremost, like having a mission as from a company perspective that, and I don't mean like your company mission, I just mean like in the sense of like your company stands for something that a large number of people care about is actually a really good filter for if you're looking for different areas to focus in a business. We were an advertising company, and so our mission as a company did not necessarily resonate with a large percentage of the population. So I would say first and foremost, it's a huge advantage if you start a company in a category where your mission is something a large number of people are drawn to. That's a huge advantage in the hiring process. That's like number one. I would say number two, knowing who you are, which whether it's culture or values or something looser than that, mission, it really does help you filter the process. Like, we had a speaker come in who runs a company called Madison Reed, which is a female like hair care focused tech company. And, she said, we talk a lot about love at the office. Like, we love our product, we love our colleagues, like we want to work in an environment with lots of love. And it's like one of those things, like that's a clear filter, like if someone comes in and goes, I don't want love at the office, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't resonate with me at all. That's great. Then they'll stop interviewing, right? So it's like knowing who you are in terms of, being able to express that to candidates really helps you filter in terms of knowing who should be a fit. So I think it's like, know who you are and express that in the process. Okay. I think the third thing is the process should really, really at its core reflect the best things about the company. And I didn't really appreciate that at all. And in my prior companies, I always remembered like we felt good when we turned a candidate down because we felt like that strengthened or that showed to us how high our bar was. And I think that's really the wrong lens. Like it's fine to turn people down, but you should make sure they feel good about that process as much as you feel good about that process. Any personal or corporate value in turning other people down or displaying your high bar, I think is really a negative lens and doesn't have a place in the hiring process. And then I think you need a single person responsible for the hiring process and be accountable to the results. And we were late in bringing that person in and finding a great person.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. What else? So obviously you're really proud of your hiring process and the team that you built. What were you think some of your other keys to success at BrightRoll in terms of operational or ways that you manage the business?
I mean, I think the thing that people always say, why were you successful? I think number one was focus. And focus was in a huge amount driven by the fact that we struggled raising large amounts of capital in the beginning. And it's like the classic story of, for us, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but for us, not having a lot of resources, people, engineering talent, money in the bank, etc., really forced us to be extremely frugal and focused. But of course, when we reflect, that was actually our greatest strength. And many companies we competed with early in our trajectory had, more money, more people, more sort of, marketing value in the category. And those things really ended up not being turned into lots of long-term value. So, I think, your sort of default position being no, like, no, we're not going to do that. No, we're not going to expand in areas that aren't core. No, we're not going to spend money in these, having that kind of bias of like, we're only going to do the very few things that matter and being ruthlessly, sort of consistent in that perspective became a huge advantage. And, sort of anecdotes about that, there were lots of people trying to innovate in video advertising around, different ways of selling and different ad units and different ways of pricing. And lots of companies, tried to expand into areas. And, our just core was television is a $70 billion market. It's one ad product. It's really simple to understand. People already buy it. Let's just focus on moving dollars from what people already know into the digital category and just like never veer from trying to like change the way people buy media, rather just, make the way they buy media much more efficient in a new category. And we were just like laser focused on that. I could go into the nuances of that, but I would just say, don't try to change too much, particularly in a category that already has a channel that's working. Yeah. It's just like focus on the areas in which you can add value, and that was a huge part of our success.
As a CEO, how much time did you devote to the sales process in terms of working with clients? Did you, some folks carry back a little bit, some folks don't get involved at all, let their VP of sales or CRO handle it. How do you see, your role in the sales process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best CEOs in technology companies are people that can straddle the line between sales and sort of product and engineering. And we talked about this in our sort of pre-interview, but I think, and this was the quote from Mark Leslie at Business School, sort of the sales team and the engineering team are like the drivetrains of the company, and everyone else, including the CEO in the company, supports those two organizations. And this isn't 100% true across Silicon Valley, but I used to say at our sales conference, I would say, my job is to make the sales team feel like we're a sales-driven company, and everything is about sales, and I'm a salesperson, and sales is what matters, and we're going to focus on supporting the sales organization first and foremost. And then when I talk to the product and engineering organization, you need to make that team think that we're a product and engineering organization. All that matters is, software development and best of breed product and engineering processes, and we're going to temper the sales team's enthusiasm to make sure they're supporting product engineering. And I would say that all with tongue in cheek, because both teams knew that I was saying that to the other team. And I think that particularly in the media category, we really do straddle the line. In maybe the same way like enterprise software does. Mm-hmm. You think of a company like Salesforce or kind of B2B businesses, because we are a B2B business, right? Mm-hmm. And so I sort of tongue in cheek, made those statements to those teams, but on a personal level, I had to do that individually. I needed to go to sales calls. I needed to be in front of customers. And when I was in front of them, I would tell them, I'm not the sales guy. The sales guy is sitting next to me. I'm the product and engineering guy. But I'm here because I want to hear your feedback. We want to build products that drive value for you. And it let me have credibility in the sales meeting as not a salesperson. Mm-hmm. And of course, when I would go to the product engineering offsites and strategy sessions, I would say, let me tell you about the revenue of the business. Let me tell you what customers care about. Let me tell you, how somebody who's in the product using it to drive their business, mm-hmm. Speaks and feels and experiences our product. And I think that if you can straddle that line, you can really drive, I think, more value than someone who's best of breed in one but can't understand the other side. Mm. Now, of course, that happened to be my background, so that was where I was biased. Yeah. I don't think you have to be that way to be successful. I would just say if you're not that way, you really need to hire people that can sort of counterbalance your skill set.
That makes a ton of sense. And so when you think about the other functions in a company, you think about marketing, obviously Silicon Valley is a very product and technology-driven area, right? How did you think about treating marketing? Was it just to support sales and kind of driving customers into the top of the funnel? Was it product marketing, in terms of helping to define new products? Or where did marketing fit for you under the rubric?
Yeah, I think that when I look at our history, marketing, we did okay in marketing, but I would never say it was an area that we really differentiated and won versus our peer set. And when I look at our peer set, I also don't feel like anybody, was sort of the sort of 10x better than the category on that. So I don't know if in our category it's just a really hard category to break out in marketing, or just nobody's done it well. So I have a hard time having a lot of strong advice in that area. I guess I would say that what ultimately really worked for us was, driving as much of our marketing value in ways that weren't paid. Mm. So we did a ton of things like contributed articles or speaking or content that we created. We were never really successful at spending money in terms of generating kind of leads or value. Mm. I think in the media business, so much of the business, it's a small customer set, very high kind of ticket price, millions of dollars per client. And, you're just not going to win those businesses by creating an online lead or by, doing some form of kind of lead gen. So I just think in the B2B marketing, in the category we're in of media, marketing wasn't the defining characteristic of the winners.
Okay. How do you think about, so you've got all these different functions that reported up into you. How do you manage, or did you manage your kind of day-to-day and week-to-week interactions with the team? What's your, what was your cadence in terms of getting reports, getting updates, meeting with the team, and how did that maybe change for you, or did you, find the best balance?
Yeah, I think that there are a few things that I believe to my absolute core, and that's because they worked for me. I was very much a fan of the weekly meeting.
Weekly meeting with the
Monday morning, the entire team that reports to me, and eventually we had a few people who didn't report to me, but like the operating team that's running the business, being super clear and transparent within that team about like what's going on, and then doing one-on-ones with people that report to you and being religious about them during the week. Every week. Those were the two things that I was absolutely core to, and then we did an all hands with the whole company once a week, and then eventually that became an every other week once we were over a couple hundred people. But those were sort of my sort of cadence of communication.
And how did you manage those meetings? Were you getting reports in those meetings? Did reports come in prior? How did you kind of manage that?
Yeah, so we sort of followed this model of we wanted everyone to kind of like disseminate up all the way up to me and then disseminate down in a weekly cadence, right? So I wanted to have everyone kind of report up as to what they're working on in progress, anything they're blocked on, and kind of like current state. And then we would kind of report down any decisions that have been made, changes, overall strategy, etc. And so, we had our Monday meeting basically split between dissemination, basically all the departments sharing out, kind of state and, progress and anything that they're blocked on. And then we would have, a part of that meeting in terms of like decisions that need to be made, things we were blocked on, how we're going to resolve them, state of things that only I or a limited number of people would know, like, capital or the board or anything like that. And we would just kind of like pulse that, up and down every week. I would say at certain times that meeting needed to be much more around a decision-making meeting where like there were really core issues that we had to address, and there were times at which that needed to be much more of a dissemination meeting around state and understanding what other teams were working on. And so, that meeting changed, at different times from, an hour meeting that was mostly decision-making to, an hour meeting that was mostly dissemination plus an hour that was decision-making, kind of fluctuated over time, and I think that was just a reflection of where we were as a company, but we always had both dissemination and decision making done on a weekly basis.
And how did you set goals for those for the team? Was it weekly, monthly, quarterly?
We did quarterly. Okay. I'm sure in our earlier times we were a shorter time frame, but eventually we moved to more of a kind of quarterly cycle, and we followed the kind of like objectives and key results process where some of those would be top down, some of them would be bottom up. We would make sure that everybody, if there was anything shared among multiple teams, it was goals on multiple teams. We would grade ourselves every quarter in kind of a public forum, and we would share that across the entire company, and then eventually we did that through the entire organization. So every single person in the company had publicly disclosed quarterly goals, and their grades among their performance was shared, and it wasn't tied to their compensation. We just wanted a transparent sort of goaling and grading process to hold each other accountable.
And how did you think about failure in the context of goals? Was it, Google's famous for having people trying to target, kind of 60-70% accomplishment is...
Yeah, we replicated that model. Okay. And in the beginning, it was very hard for people to be comfortable with failure, but I think ultimately people got comfortable. I would say our average was more like 50 to 60, so either we didn't do a good job or we were successful getting people to put stretch goals in. But, I think that was generally our sort of average.
How far ahead do you think a CEO should be thinking? Were you thinking, a quarter ahead, a year ahead? What was your typical...
I do think it depends on where a company is in its maturity, where the category is in its maturity, and where the sort of competitive set is. Yeah. But I would say now in reflection, I think, startups actually have an advantage, which is super ironic in being long-term thinkers. Because you think about startups as being capital constrained and, thinking about how you're going to, meet your burn rate in 12 months. But on the flip side, public companies and companies that are in, kind of measured on profitability and EBITDA multiples really do have a hard time thinking far out. Sure. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but I think we were always thinking a few years out, and I think that was a huge advantage for us in retrospect. So, I think as a CEO, you should have, clarity, kind of a year out, not perfect clarity, but kind of like a sense of like where you want things to go. I think you should be thinking a few years out, but I never really did any real work, more than a year out in terms of like defining strategy and roadmaps and things like that. But I think I was always, in my mind, I was always thinking, where is this going to be in a few years? But, we were kind of like very clear in a quarter, kind of a sense in 6 months, clarity, but nothing kind of like really documented over the next year. And then on an individual level, I was thinking beyond that. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Okay, well, that's great. Any parting words of wisdom for entrepreneurs out there? Is there, they've raised money, they're growing their business, but they're now kind of thinking about taking it to the next level. What would you like to impart to the next generation?
I mean, I guess my number one takeaway, and I said this, I'm not sure I believed it, but I said this when I started BrightRoll, which was, the only way really to be qualified to be an entrepreneur is to have been one, right? And I would say the same thing is true. The only real way to be qualified to be a CEO of a 500-person company is to have been one, right? There's no real, I mean, of course, you can always gain more skill sets, but there's really nothing like actually doing it and being in the seat. And so if you take the risk and you start a company and you raise money or don't, and, it fails, the irony is at least at the end of the process, you're then qualified to do it, right? Mm-hmm. And so my sort of advice to folks is don't get so wrapped up around the axle around, am I ready or, am I qualified or all that? Because it's like, I think the right thing to do is essentially dive in and then, there's so much support for failure in Silicon Valley that the irony is it's the greatest set of experiences you could ever have. Mm-hmm. So, I just recommend, don't be dumb about what you pursue, but take risks, dive in, and at least at the end you're qualified to do it the next time.
And what are you most excited about for the future of where the Valley is heading, where technology is heading? What are the things that, are getting you excited now? That you maybe are moving out of advertising at a later point in time, a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's like a single sector or sort of area of investment. I think it's such an exciting time because the sort of bar of risk, going back to my prior comment about taking risk, I mean, it's so much lower risk now on so many levels. There's many ways to be successful. You need a lot less capital. There's so many more resources for entrepreneurs. There's so many more angels that can be, sources of money, but also sources of support. I just feel like it's just such a great time to be an entrepreneur. Bubble and sort of frothiness aside. I'm just excied that the model that has been, sort of honed over the last, call it 20 years, is just humming. And I think it's an exciting time for entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on Meet the Operators. We'll have you back again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.